How can we talk about open access without influencing policy? So one of the delegates is a senior policy coordinator in the Canada Research Council, correct?
So I am a senior policy advisor at the secretariat that supports the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, the CRCC in Canada, yes.
Okay. So can you please tell us, reintroduce yourself? I'm sure they didn't get your name and everything that you do, and also your role in this conference.
Absolutely. So it's my pleasure to be at this wonderful summit. It's actually 5 conferences in one, I counted. So it's a huge effort. And my name is Illa. I live I live in Montreal, and I work at the Canada Research Coordinating Committee. And we have a series of priorities to coordinate research policies at the federal level. So one of the priorities we have is to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in research. I specifically work on supporting the committee's commitment to advance Indigenous self-determination in research. So I'd be happy to tell you a bit more about it with the next question.
So as someone in policy, how does open access look like for you and also for your team?
So it's a very important issue and element of the research process, because it has to do with not just how we share knowledge through publications, but also how we produce knowledge and for whom. So it opens up a lot of questions in those areas. The 3 federal research councils in Canada, the equivalent of the National Research Foundation in South Africa, they are thinking very hard about this question of open access, what it means, how to enable it so that both the readers interested in accessing the content can do so without having to pay, but also how the authors can publish the results of their research, make it accessible to a broad public without having to pay as well. So this is something that we're thinking about, and there's obviously a lot of elements that need to be considered as we think through these questions, because as you may know, and we've been discussing at this conference, many publishers are charging author processing charges, APCs, that are quite prohibitive, and so that poses an equity, diversity, inclusion, and access question that we need to address.
Okay, so after this meeting, what are the key takeaways that you present when you go back to your team? The recommendations and also things that you've taken as people are presenting and asking questions in the summit.
So I think for me, the key takeaway is that we cannot talk about open access in a fragmented way. This is part of a broader discussion about knowledge ecosystems. Knowledge ecosystems that happen in different languages, that happen in different regions. So the importance of locality when we consider questions, not just of open access, but really how we share knowledge, how we produce knowledge. And when we think about open access, we can't think it only from the perspective of maybe countries who are able to fund their researchers to pay author processing charges, but also from the system as a whole. How does it look like in other countries where the research system has other demands and the funding happens at different levels? So we really need to think about this systemically, and I think this is what I will take back, to have that really global view that at the same time pays a lot of attention to locality and to the relations that enable knowledge production.
So how has been Cape Town and the team, the host here in South Africa?
I'm speechless. It's been fantastic. Going back to this question of relationality and knowledge production, I think the conference organizers have really embodied the overall values of the summit that have to do with openness, and they've welcomed us with such warmth, have taken care of us throughout by not just sharing knowledge generously, but also feeding us, gifting us with music, gifting us with their knowledge in general. And that's been really fantastic. So that I'm also taking away from, that's actually another key takeaway from the summit. I hope that at some point in Canada we can reciprocate that.
Yes. Any last words and key highlights from the conference?
So I think I've outlined perhaps the 2 most important takeaways for me. It's the importance of building those relationships, building those dialogues so that we understand what open access, open science, and other discussions look like in each of our contexts. And that takes time. It takes time to understand what the meanings of that are. And also, I think for the more specific policy world, kind of trying to build capacity within the policy world, mainstream policy world, to have other people who authorize funding, who make funding available to researchers, why it is important to enable sustainable, equitable, and accessible forms of knowledge production and knowledge circulation.
Thank you so much for your time. We're still in the second meeting of the Global Summit in Diamond Open Access.